Also, and welcome back to the Welsh History Podcast. Today's episode is a Freeform episode, episode 7. We're going to be talking about plastic fans, culture, and identity, and kind of what all those mean. Now, when I did my culture episode, one of the things that I had actually started to do was I started to kind of delve into a lot of the sports-related stuff, and I backed out of it at the time because I thought, it's not what I'm really trying to do here. It's not what I'm trying to bring up or get into in general. And I think it's difficult to talk about and not have a real concept of what we're trying to get across, because I want this to be clear. This is not an attack or an opinion piece in which I'm basically saying these type of fans or those type of fans are bad. It's more just a comment on how it shapes and drives an idea amongst some segment of people that look at things from a very territorial perspective, and kind of why I view this as not necessarily helpful, and why I think it's, from my own personal perspective, something that, while I understand it, I'm not sure I could ever agree to it. So if we want to talk about, from a broader perspective, what a plastic fan is in sports, in the UK specifically. Obviously, we're talking about this from a Welsh perspective, but it is something I've seen, obviously, much more prevalent in the rest of the UK. I don't think I've heard it being said, although to a degree, I'm starting to hear it in some segments when they talk about Wrexham specifically. But I kind of want to clear a couple of things up, because I don't think it's everybody. I don't even think it's the majority. I think it's just a few people who think this way. And so for those of you who don't know what this is, I'm talking about something you're unfamiliar with. A plastic fan is often used to describe fans who are perceived as being not real fans in a terminology decided by the person saying it. Quite often it has to do with this idea that they are less authentic, that they lack an understanding of the team, that they weren't fans for a long time, that they've just kind of, typically it refers to people who are jumping on board with a team that's successful. And sometimes it just refers to someone who only follows a particular player. Like if your favorite player gets traded from, say, one team to another in North American sports, you follow that player. Or in the case of football, if one player signs with a new team, if he is, say, with, and I'm just going to use random teams here at this point, but ones that everybody would be aware of. So if, say, they were playing for Chelsea and they signed for Arsenal right afterwards, or Arsenal spent a lot of money to pull him away from Chelsea, then people who went from Chelsea to follow this player to Arsenal would be a type that could be considered a plastic fan. Now, quite often, however, where I usually hear it being used is, especially these days, is around fans from other places cheering for a specific team because they kind of like the team for reasons that have nothing to do with location. And that in and of itself is a larger discussion around that, which we're going to have a little bit of, talking about how the locality of football in the United Kingdom specifically, and other places as well. It's not like this is only an issue there, but I've seen it in other places. And it's created a situation where you have some fans who feel like their money, time, and efforts towards the team are disrespected in a way because there are these new fans that come in. And there's a perception, and maybe not inaccurate, that the team itself starts to focus in on those fans over its local loyals because those fans have more money. They have generally the ability to spend money on things, so which maybe the local fans, due to their location, due to their economic circumstances, just don't have the opportunity to do. And it is a bit of an issue in that regard. And in some ways, it's reflective of, if you think about it from the Welsh perspective specifically, Wales has got this problem with people from other countries, specifically England, moving in and buying up homes, especially in North and West Wales, more or less to be summer homes where they go to during the heat of the summer, put themselves in a milder climate near the ocean, kind of have that summertime aspect to it before they have to go back to their larger urban centers, such as London, Liverpool, Manchester, those places. And all of that has bred a lot of anger and a lot of annoyance, I guess I would say, but anger is definitely, I think, a larger portion of the perspective that these outsiders are coming in and they're not really contributing to the overall welfare of the community, but are taking away from the community. And on top of it, moving to areas that are largely, or at least larger, Welsh-speaking enclaves until these people move in. And that is that's something of a perspective that creates a lot of animosity. Well, now picture this on a sports perspective, and you have this same kind of concept. You have people who aren't dyed-in-the-wool, true blue fan of X team, but they've come in now, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, we bought the shirt, we got the tattoos, we got the, we love fill in the blank best player. We'll use Wrexham as the example today simply because it is kind of the hot commodity that everybody knows about if you follow any football at all because of their owners. But this realistically could be used by any team and any team's fan base. So if we look at Wrexham, for example, and I had questions asked to me not long ago about this because I thought it was interesting to kind of see Welsh people who I know asking me about this. So Wrexham came to North America last summer to place a series of friendlies, and one of the places they stopped in was Vancouver. And I watched the game because it was on local television here. And it was interesting to see that the local team, which is the Vancouver Whitecaps, who have a stronger following, don't get me wrong, but by comparison to football teams in the UK, it would be a very, very small following. There are loyal followers that are fans of the team that in some cases may have grown up with the team because the Whitecaps in some form or fashion have been around since the 70s. So there are people that have followed them who were little children when the team began, or in some cases may have been born into the fan base because their parents had cheered for the team. It is, let's be honest, not as a common thing in North America simply because most teams don't have that history. The Whitecaps happen to be one of those rare teams where the location and name have stuck even though they've changed leagues over and over and over again. And so because of that, they have a very special place for a lot of people. Well, Wrexham played them because in part their new Hollywood owner, Ryan Reynolds, happens to have been born and raised in Vancouver. And so there's a lot of knowledge of the city. And I think there was an idea to try and bring them up on the second go around. It was the only place they played in Canada. So they came to Canada, they played this game, and there was I wouldn't say larger or massive following of Wrexham supporters, but there was definitely a large proportion of Wrexham supporters at the game, large enough that it was noticeable. And the interesting thing was, they went around and talked to them. They weren't largely from Wales. There was a contingent who were from the Wrexham area who had followed the team over, but it was very tiny compared to the others that were now cheering for this team. And largely, they were only cheering for the team initially because of Ryan Reynolds, because of the popularity of the documentary, and probably couldn't have pointed to where Wrexham is on a map before that. However, does that mean they are plastic fans? By definition, yes. But can somebody pick up a fan of a team who isn't the normal location for a fan base and yet still be loyal fans, still have a link to that team in a way? I think largely from my own perspective, and I don't know enough about Wrexham to say for sure, but what I see from Wrexham's people generally is they're happy with this kind of stuff because it shows that their team is going to continue to rise up. One of the things that has happened because of the success of these owners is that a team that had been pretty much on the down for a very long time suddenly had an opportunity to go back up the league, to become popular, to reach out to a fan base that they'd never had before. And all of a sudden they're selling out every game. It's very difficult to get tickets right now. It's part of the reason why they're expanding the stadium, is to try and help with that a bit. But they're also cognizant and understanding that they need to keep access for the local community to be able to get to the games, because it isn't, at the end of the day, only about those people in North America or in Europe who watch the documentary and suddenly decide to support the team. It's a large portion of the reason why the team's successful is because the local fans have been there and have been suffering along with the team. And as long as they continue to be there, long after the documentary's gone, long after Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney have left, they will still be there. So it's important to keep them happy. It's important to continue to build and breed that local support, because if you don't, then it will wither on the vine when it's not the flavor of the month. Now, I say that based on the fact that that's my perspective, looking at it from an obvious level, because you have to realize that fan bases in football are built locally. They are, you cheer for your local team. But at the same time, in saying that, let's be frank with each other. I think this is something that to a degree, I find kind of funny, that I hear all the time from watching people comment. Now, I will say it isn't amongst the people I talk to in real life. Those people seem very positive about it. Like I said, those people that were questioning out of Wales about, the popularity of Wrexham, I had to be frank with them. I had to say most of the people who now suddenly follow Wrexham couldn't point to Wales on a map. Most of the people who are now following Wrexham may fall out of following Wrexham fairly shortly. It's hard to know how big the fan base is in North America. We know it exists, though, because it does. But in saying that, I follow a football team who is not the flavor of the month, hasn't been for a long time, if ever. And I started following them for various reasons. I think I may have or may not have mentioned this previously, but I started following a football team specifically because they weren't near where I lived. Because at the time living in the UK, it was very much a territorial thing, and there was a lot of hostility towards various teams. So cheering for one local team for my own benefit seemed like a risky proposition, and I didn't want to get into a conflict, as somebody who really wasn't from here or from there, with somebody over what color shirt I wore or who I happen to support. And I will say, in picking the team I did pick, they were the underdog team. They were kind of a team that had come up, got promoted when I got to the UK, to the Premier League. And I started to cheer for them because of that. And they just happened to wear a similar soccer uniform to what I wore when I was a kid. So that was the other reason why I started cheered for them. Those are the reasons why I picked them. Nothing particularly all that great. And much like people with Wrexham, I couldn't have pointed to you on a map where this place was. It's just that was what it was. So for me, that helped because it bridged a gap that I had, because I could support the team. It wasn't a London team. It wasn't a, within 5 miles of Cardiff kind of team. So it's not one where there's going to be a conflict over, you support Newport, I support Cardiff. Or you support Bristol City and I support Cardiff, or worse yet, I support Swansea and you support, it's so all of those reasons are one of the things that I wanted to avoid. So I picked the team, and in picking the team, I'm quite happy with the team. They drive me crazy. They are good and bad. They're up and down. They've been relegated and promoted several times. And generally they are frustrating. But the good news for me anyway is that there are supporter groups in North America who support the team and have supported the team for years and years and years, and they still are around, and they have their own wing in which to be a part of. Now, would you call those fans plastic? If that's your definition, that they're not local, you you picked the team at whim, which I kind of did, let's be honest, then I am by definition a plastic fan. Now, I've been a plastic fan for 20 plus years, and I've lived and died with this team all the time. And some days I do regret picking the team because of how frustrating they can be, both in ownership and in decision making from various coaches and managers and everything else. And it can be absolutely exhausting. But yet I've stuck with the team even while saying, you know what, I'll kind of support this team in the Premier League while I'm supporting this team in League One, blah, 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 blah. But what I've come to realize is this is not uncommon. Fans do this across all of UK society. People have their team and then they have their Premier League team. I've known people that have like supported the local team, but also managed to support Newcastle, or they support Arsenal, or they support Chelsea, or they support Man U. And Man U less so when I was there because that's when they were super popular. And so people were very against them. But like Man City might fall into that category as well now, but they were definitely one of those as well. And it's kind of interesting to see how that may or may not be perceived as a plastic fan. And it's one of those things that I think is very much a part of the way society has come to kind of look at things. And I want to make it clear that for me, what I see in that is that I think it's built up in a frustration over people who are coming from outside and buying up teams, or worse yet, coming in, buying up teams and then neglecting them and effectively wrecking the linkages that they have with their local community. And I think that's what scares people. I think the Milton Keynes Dawn effect of taking a team that was established in London and then moving them out of the London area to reform them in Milton Keynes has left a lot of people very skeptical of that kind of behavior. And it's a very American thing and North American thing to do. Like my own teams I support in Canada and the United States, some of them have moved from one location to the other. I happen to support the San Francisco Giants. They've moved from New York to San Francisco. And by the time, of course, I knew them, they were in San Francisco. I support the LA Rams, who have been the LA Rams, St. Louis Rams, the LA Rams in the time I've known them. And then, of course, before that were the Cleveland Rams from the beginning, who then moved to LA in the 40s. So it is not an uncommon thing to happen. And then the other thing, of course, is we have teams that are expanded into, like the team that I happen to support in hockey, the Edmonton Oilers, was an expansion team, a created team, which then became popular because they were successful and are now fairly well known, at least in North America, because of that. So all of these things being what they are, it's harder for me as a North American fan to sort of understand all of that, because while we do have teams that are the local lifeblood and we have fears about them moving, which are real, unlike a lot of that kind of concept is more built around in football about the team shutting down, because that's more likely to happen in the lower leagues in England and Wales than it is that they're going to move. And of course, with all that is a pride in the team, because the team is associated with the city. The team is associated with the ups and downs of that city. Like if you think about it, in a lot of respects, local fan bases are as loyal as they are because sometimes the only positive you have in your life is the sports team. Like if you're having economic problems at home, family life issues at school, you know, so many other things that happen, sports becomes kind of an out for a lot of people, much like movies and other things become an out. But then with that comes this perspective of a loyalty, of a fanaticism, that, and this is overused, but obviously where we get the term fan from. And so you live and die with this team to the point where sometimes it's unhealthy. And not being able to separate yourself from that can be kind of problematic at times. But this idea of local pride and local supporting of teams has become mixed in with a more I mean, I'm going to call it what it is, insidious, this pride and nationalism around these areas, these cities, these teams, then becomes its own set of problems because it builds walls around people. It builds walls against other communities. And yeah, we all do that. And yes, we all have that perspective. I mean, even here where I live, locally, there's rivalries between different cities, and we all kind of talk badly about the other city, but I don't think it's to the same degree. And I don't think everybody's like this, let me be clear. But I think there is a more hostile and a bit more territorial viewpoint when it comes to some of this. And I think it helps to create walls between people in ways that aren't necessarily healthy. And I think it creates a debate about whether these cultural ties and this idea of protecting what you have comes at the expense of accepting other viewpoints or other fans coming from other places. Because if your concept is that your local team or your local city above all else, and that fans from the outside are unwelcome or unwanted, then I think that becomes a problem. I think that becomes an issue where we need to address what they are. And I think it can be seen in a wider cultural perspective in the idea about how you view immigrants or how you view people from the outside who've come into your community and what your perspective is on them. Now, I don't want to take this to extreme levels because this is not what I'm trying to say, but I think there is some parallels to that. And I think from a cultural and heritage perspective, it can get a bit tricky. I always kind of think about this. I had a discussion one time with a friend of mine from Wales who when we were talking, and this is kind of the opposite, but I wanted to bring this up to kind of understand this, okay, in this perspective. Now, as someone who has never been born in Wales, but lived there for 4 years, who has ancestry from there, who has cousins that still very much live in North Wales, who I can go and talk to, who still, I mean, my one cousin looks like my dad almost exactly. My niece and one of my cousins kind of look very similar. Like you can see the family resemblance, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So with all that said and done, our experiences and environments that we grew up in are very different. And so it's not the same, obviously. But me coming from another country, living in Wales, or conversely, living in Canada and saying, hey, I'm a Welsh Canadian, I have Welsh ancestry and I love the Welsh flag, and I have, Owen Glyndwr is my personal hero. That is great and all, but to some people, that's not a Welsh person. That's just somebody who likes Welsh culture who doesn't live in Wales. Conversely, they will look at other people who have immigrated to Wales and view them as more Welsh than I am. Now, for some, that's an insult. I don't take it as an insult. Let me be clear again. Personally, I understand that perspective. Canada is a weird place. We don't have a long shared history, even though some people try and argue we do, of a monolith of a culture that is now, unless you're talking the First Nations peoples, is now being moved in on from people from other countries and being claimed by people like, you don't have an Irishman who claims that their family is actually Canadian. You don't have a French person who says, oh yeah, I'm a Quebecer French person. I don't know how to describe this, you know what I mean? Or a Canadian Frenchman. It doesn't work like that. Conversely, going backwards, it's difficult to compare and it's difficult to explain because my loyalties to my own country are still strong. I still will and do vote. I still will and do participate in national political concerns, and I participate in my own culture because, of course, I live here. So why wouldn't I? But I also feel a kinship to Wales. Otherwise, I wouldn't have started the Welsh History Podcast. And I will say, and I am thankful that even though people, rightfully so, will push back on my pronunciation or push back on the way I say things or ask me to use more Welsh terminology, I don't feel like people have said, why is this Canadian guy doing Welsh history? Which I think is important and I think is great. And hey, I'll be the first one to say. So I think from that standpoint, it's something we've benefited from with this podcast, at least for me, is having the acceptance that I've gotten from everybody who listens to this podcast and in some cases watches on YouTube. I appreciate it. It creates a lot of unity in ways that I think are, I hope, are important. But I think the debate around culture, around nationality, around immigration, and this concept of plastic fans, which hits an extreme view to some extent about acceptance and how we view other people who claim Welsh heritage, who claim Welsh identity, or who claim to be a supporter of a local sports team, if we want to put it that way, who maybe never lived there, who just bought a shirt, who just watch online and have never been to, you know, fill in the blank stadium you happen to have the local team that you support. Could you imagine, for example, if there were people who are watching, you know, Aberystwyth every Saturday in the Premier League in Wales, who support the team through thick and thin, but happen to live in, well, let's say Argentina, or they happen to live in, you know, California, and how excited they would be to go and watch this little team play a game in the rain in the middle of October or November or December. And everybody would be more excited for them because it would be such an oddity. Like, I always think back to my own experience when I moved to Wales and how often people were so positive. I would meet people in the street and it wouldn't be like, oh, what's this fill in the blank person doing here? They would be, oh, what brought you here? Why are you living here? Why on earth would you come here? Which is a comment I heard quite frequently. That sort of expectation or response is such a welcoming one. And I think that's the thing. I think these kind of fans who become loyal to teams because of the flavor of the month are the issue, rather than somebody who comes loyal to a particular team, not because they're well known or not because they have famous owners, but because they like them for reasons outside of that. And they can still be reasons that a localized fan is not going to agree with. There are teams that I have cheered for in the past because I liked the jersey they wore, or I liked, you know, the look of the team. You know, I started cheering for the Rams basically because I saw them in a movie. I mean, talk about picking a team just at random. As a little child, I watched a movie in which the Rams were in as sort of a set dressing to the actual story. And I love the look of their helmets. I love the Ram helmets, which have the Ram on the top of it. And it had nothing to do with sheep. It was just the fact that it looked cool. And on top of that, my brother had played for a high school team who also were the Rams. So it was kind of a match made in heaven for me. So I started cheering for the team. Had zero to do with my connection to LA, which I had none. It had zero to do with anything. You know, I followed this player or I followed that player. I had no clue. I was not an NFL fan before that. It was more of a decision of, oh, I like that. I'm going to cheer for that. And I think we need to remember that people make decisions for all sorts of reasons why they support teams. And while I know football's not used to this, I think it's something it needs to get used to from a larger perspective because of the money involved. And I know that's going to be difficult for some people to hear because the last thing they want is more money in the system coming from outside. But the difficulty right now in football is helping teams survive that aren't particularly well loved. Like if you think about Wrexham existed as a very low league team They were in the National League, which is below the top 4 leagues in English football, which meant that their financing was always a bit iffy. The players were not necessarily loyal to the team because they just simply didn't have the money to keep them. And it was always on a knife edge about whether this team could stay afloat. And that is the case for most teams that are in what they call the football pyramid of teams who play either amateur, semi-pro, or pro teams. And they all have issues around financing and around money and around the overall ability to continue to function. If they're specifically a low league team who's trying to get up, you have to usually spend money to go up. Well, how do you do that if you don't have two famous owners who've come in who have a decent amount of money and have backing from both the community and the larger public? Well, you have to do it the hard way. And that can breed a lot of envy and a lot of hatred to Wrexham because of that, which I understand. But at the same time, I think that, again, going back to being a supporter of a team that isn't Wrexham, I don't really envy that. What I want is I want my team to do what they're doing, not get the rich, well-known owner, but rather be smart about what they're doing, hire the right people, bring in the right set of players so that the team can be good. And if the team's good, they will be popular. And if they're popular, they will have fans. And let's not kid ourselves. If you're none of those things, you don't have fans, regardless of how loyal the fan base might be locally. You know, people don't like watching teams lose. And yes, there are hardcore supporters that will go through thick and thin. Hell, I've been involved with one of those teams. I had a team that lost consistently for 10 straight years. They were so consistently bad that amongst the fan base, we call it the decade of darkness. And had we had relegation, I don't know where we would have ended up. But that group of supporters stuck with the team, but that's not enough to keep the team afloat. You have to have the casual fan base that actually just pays attention on the day of the game and loses attention just as quickly. And I think that's the same with when we look at a nationalized cultural ideal of what makes a Welsh person. And now we're going to get into that detail a little bit, but I don't want to get too lost into this because I think this is almost a discussion for another day. But I think it's important for us, both as members of our own country and citizens of the world, especially in this day and age, to consider that it's good to have people that consider your location home, be they through immigration and naturalization, or through being linked because they maybe once vacationed there and really liked the place. Maybe they lived there for a time and they really like the place. Maybe they have family roots, so go back there. And so they feel an affinity to the place. All of that helps because what it does is it means these people come and visit. They spend money, importantly. They will possibly maybe buy real estate. Maybe they invest in local things. Maybe they go to a local shop and they buy stuff from that shop that's from that area, which helps support that area. That's, I think, important. I think it supports the understanding of a place and an appreciation for a place. And I think if every Williams, Jones, Richards, Evans, fill in the blank, whatever last name you want, who lives in, anywhere from South Africa to Australia to Kentucky to Alberta, use my own example, suddenly says, I want to know more about Wales. What is this place where my ancestors are from? And maybe I want to go see it because I've heard so many things. If those people suddenly decide to do that, that shouldn't be disencouraged. It should be encouraged, I think. And I'm slightly biased, I understand. But I also think that for people who are immigrating to that location, they also should be considered Welsh. Just because someone wasn't born there, if they move there and they become a citizen of the area, that they are just as equally a part of that country as anybody else and should be considered as such. People who move to my country who become Canadian citizens are not considered, non-citizens. They shouldn't be looked at that way. And again, what I'm trying to say is that both sides of that should be considered Welsh, or at least Welsh adjacent. In the cases of those of us with Welsh ancestry who maybe never lived there and don't understand, the dynamics and the frustrations of a Welsh person who's trying to deal with a language which is going, is always struggling against extinction, and having some yokel from Texas who comes out, or again, I'll go back to my own place, Canada, who comes over and starts, talking me down. I'm not going to be very happy with that, and rightfully so. I think we have to be and should be sensitive to each other. And like I said, especially in this time period, I think that's important. And I think building inclusivity amongst ourselves in that regard helps Wales continue to be a place that people want to be, that people want to know about, and importantly for the economy, want to spend money at. If you're a supporter of Wales, which, my gosh, if you listen to this podcast, you have to be, I think it's important, and I think it's significant, and I think it's something we should be doing. I always feel bad that I don't know the language very well. I definitely don't even know how to pronounce things, let alone speak it. And there are times when I try and learn, and there's ups and downs and in and outs with it. But at the same time, I know that it's impossible for me to have a real good understanding of the language just simply because it's harder for me to interact with people who speak it from a day-to-day basis. So with all of that serious conversation, lots of balancing acts to make things work for everybody, and I get that. And I don't want to see the fan base at Wrexham, as an example, be screwed over by these wealthy owners who've come in, made some money and left. That's not how I want them to be treated, just because at a short time it was popular in Canada or in America or in Indonesia to cheer for this Welsh team. I don't want that to supersede the local fan base who have been through thick and thin. So make that clear, just so we're good and we understand each other, so that somebody doesn't come for me later and say, well, you just like them because you hate this one. It's like, no, I don't hate either side. I understand both sides of the opinion. I just would love it if both sides could understand that, because at the end of the day, we all want what's best for the team, or we all want what's best for the country. And we don't want the country to struggle. We don't want the country to become isolated. We want it to be that when people hear Wales, they don't immediately think of a aqua mammal. We don't want people to think that, oh, well, they're just this or just that. We want people to understand and know and continue to acknowledge the country, because the more that people do, the better it is. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you want to basically pick me apart for being wrong, you can do that at the Welsh History Podcast at gmail.com. You can reach out to me on Twitter, formerly known as, now known as X, at Welsh History Pod, or on Facebook.com/Welsh History. Or if you have LinkedIn, I'm on there too. Welsh History Podcast, just search it up. I don't mind people following me that way too. And with all that said and done, thank you, everyone. Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Welsh History Podcast is a member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. To find more information on them, you can do so at evergreenpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.